Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful start to your 2025. I know we're a few weeks in, and joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, how's your year starting off so far?
It's good. There was a deep sigh on your end when you hit record. I don't know if that was just you're already, I don't know, dreading the new year. You're
Well,
just
no, I
tired.
mean, at the beginning of the new year, I was gone for a conference, so this is like my first week back, so I'm kind of doing catch up, trying to do all my other stuff I need to do. Plus, we've had some issues with our heating at the church. So I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We never know, but yeah, that's
And
us.
with the temperatures the way they are currently.
Yeah. Like it's funny because like my room's a sauna, but then like a preschool room is like everyone's wearing their winter coats, and it's like they have theirs set to like now they're set to 70. It's only like 50 to 54 degrees in their room. I have mine set to 68. It's like 78 degrees in my room. Like, so I just turned it off. I'm like, hopefully that heat will then go somewhere else. That's I'm not using it.
Well, where I work, the building that I work in, the thermostats are controlled via like sensor,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
uh it's based on the number of bodies and movement in a particular room. Like they'll set it at a certain temperature, but if there's nobody that's been in there for a significant amount of time or a week or whatever, um, because the kids are like on winter break right now, you could walk into a room and the thermostat will say 63 degrees because nobody's been in there for 2 weeks, and you know it's absolutely freezing. But once you get in there and start moving around, then the heat kicks on.
Yeah.
um, but it's kind of the same deal. It's hot in one room and cold in the other, and then in the summertime it's too hot and not cold enough. And
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh man. It is. This weather's been ridiculous. I mean, even when I was in Florida for my conference, it was like 30, 40 degrees down there, and it was cold. I mean, definitely warmer than it is here in Ohio, but
makes you
it
want to
was still
ride roller
cold.
coasters in the 30-degree weather.
Well, that was the thing. Like Laura and I, we got on the virtual queue to ride Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which is the retheming of Splash Mountain. And I never got wet on Splash Mountain every time I rode that ride. So I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. So we're going and we go up a hill, we go down, water splashes, nothing. We go down that final big drop, that hill. Right when we hit the bottom and we start going, all this water started splashing up and just started hitting me in the face. Laura's winter jacket was soaked. I had a hoodie on. It was soaked. So once we got done, I like got off the boat, took off my hoodie, wrapped it around me so it could dry because I'm like, it's freezing and I'm like soaked. At least you got to ride that ride. So yay, us. But
But at what price?
it was it was worth it. I mean, it was worth it. It was fine. But yeah, I mean, it's just the weather's been crazy, and a lot of other things have been crazy too, just with stuff at like, things we see on TikTok about other people's churches or pastors doing dumb things. It's just it never ends, Micah.
I
It
thought you were going to
never
say that.
ends.
I thought you were going to talk about TikTok going away.
Is it because I keep hearing things like, "Oh, it may not because there's a bunch of senators are moving to like
Apparently, there's been so the two things that I've heard. Well, three things. One, I've heard TikTok is supposed to go away as of this Sunday,
yeah,
and what that looks like is if you were to log onto your phone and click the TikTok app, it would just be black. It just wouldn't load. I've also heard that, like you're saying, the Senate is there's some senators that are trying to push legislation to kind of kick this down the road a couple of
like
years.
about 300 days. Like,
Yeah, so about a year or so to figure it out. And then thirdly, I heard Elon Musk wants to buy it, and he's been talking to China about buying it.
well, I've also heard like other people were buying it, like
Oh,
one
I've
of
heard
the
that too.
shark. Like it's like you never know. It's like so much drama, and then of course there's people who are like going to Red Note where they're signing the agreement and it's all written in Mandarin. They don't know what they're signing their way. I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. I'm good.
Well, it's funny because they're saying that it's a threat to security because of China, and it's like one of the my favorite videos that I've been seeing on this whole topic has been, let me watch my Chinese videos on my Chinese platform on my Chinese phone on my Chinese Amazon chair. Like, just keep referring to like everything we have is made in China or has come from China, and it's
Yeah,
like this app has been in existence since when? 2018, 17, something
yeah,
like that. And it's like
yeah.
it's not been
20.
a problem until now.
And not only that, but how many people have like bought stuff off Wish and Temu, and they're all now all their information is with the Chinese government. Like, we're not banning those sites, are we? And that's actually a commerce site. That's like credit card information being sent. Like, what information are they getting from me by, I don't know, putting like my vinyl spin of the week up on my TikTok page? Like, or what stuff are they getting when you post like a Nerd Talk update or a Nerd Talk video? Like, nothing.
There's people in China, Scott, in a boardroom, and they're watching your videos going, this guy listens to good music.
Yeah, they're like, hey, this guy's good music. We should send a drone to break into his house and steal his record collection. That must have a big battery on that drone to go all the way from China to Ohio.
That's what happened to your original count. You know that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, but regardless, let's get to our topic today. So our topic, we're going to be talking about this kind of this idea of authentic versus perfection when it comes to churches, how they feel, how visitors respond to these churches, how they promote themselves. And I think it's a very interesting topic because if you were to ask me maybe 5 or 10 years ago, how do you try to make your church? What are some of the ways you do to try to make your church more appealing to people outside the church? I would say, well, we want to make sure we have like a good polished video, we have good marketing. We want to make sure that, you know, our spaces, our classrooms look good. They're not filled with like random junk, or they look updated, carpet. There's so much stuff that or maybe we need to move out of the country old church and more in a warehouse. Like, there's always a lot of different things that if you were to ask a church leader or a pastor about how they try to promote their church to a wider audience, a lot of them would say, well, it has to have a certain look. It has to
Mm.
have a certain like it has to have like a certain presentation or a look. And I think that's been kind of the growing trend for at least probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years, just to kind of have like a certain look and not try to look dated and look professional and kind of have kind of like a certain professionalism to it. But then now you're kind of almost seeing a shift where now people kind of want more authenticity. Um, and I think I've been seeing it more, especially when you work at a historical building that has a contemporary service and a traditional service. And, sometimes I'm seeing more younger people attending our 11 o'clock service because they like the pipe organ. They like kind of the more liturgical things, even though it's kind of like more of that old historical style. They kind of like that more than the guitars and the drums now. And I find it fascinating about that shift that's happening. So, Micah, as far as that topic of authentic or perfection, are you seeing kind of that shift, or are you kind of seeing more like people are still kind of focused on branding and kind of trying to have a certain look to their church?
Sure. I think I've seen both. Um, and I also think I would venture to say that there are churches that are still trying to do both and serve the best of both, meaning that they're trying to be sensitive to an older generation, but they're also trying to cater to a new generation. And so it's like, sure, we can do contemporary music, sure, we can do lights, sure, we can do, branding and marketing, but we're still going to sing hymns and we're still going to leave our church looking the exact same way that it has looked for the last 100 years and try to keep that heritage alive. Um, I've also seen too, like where churches that are doing, more of the, I don't know, like you were talking about with the liturgy, things like that. I think a great example of that is what's the church, what's his name? The guy got in trouble for not doing anything.
The guy who got in trouble. Oh, Matt Chandler.
Yeah, I thought it was Matt Chandler. What church is he at?
He is at
The
Village
Village.
Church.
They do a great job of like having a full band yet singing traditional style, a traditional style of music, but also incorporating that liturgy, incorporating the teaching, and being very like SBC, Southern Baptist,
Hmm.
very kind of rooted in that theology.
Hmm.
But their venue looks modern. But if you look at their live stream, you know, you look straight ahead and this is where their worship band sets up. And then they kind of pivot over just a little bit, and it's like 45 degrees. And then that's where their teaching takes place. And it's almost like it's its own separate thing.
Hmm.
Um, I also think that it's like I think you have to be realistic too with like your online digital footprint. You know, I think it makes sense for an elevation church or a life church that are reaching thousands and thousands and thousands of people online every week and their video or Bethel for that matter. I just looked at their YouTube channel for something because we were talking about something before we hit record, and their Sunday service from last week has 24,000 views. Um, like I think it's one thing to offer a service of, having something on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. But
Hmm.
if you're not really growing in that space, then, what I guess what I'm saying is like, in order to compete, not that it's about competing, you have to have a certain, like you were talking about branding in mind and marketing and strategy in mind to make your church stand out online. And that could mean, several things. Like you could have an online church host and have that person on a stream somewhere completely different from the venue and like have them talking to you like before the service starts and it's almost like an on-site correspondent in a way of like a news broadcaster, for example, right? Like if they're on location, you know I see Elevation do it a lot, but they have somebody outside of their auditorium and you see the people visually walking into the church in the background, and like so he's talking about, welcome to Elevation Church Online, we're so glad you're here. This is um, what's going to happen today. This is the sermon series that Pastor Stephen is preaching on. um, there's just a number of ways that they connect with folks online, whereas if you have, I don't know, Joe Schmo's church down the street, Country Church USA, you're literally pointing a camera at your stage and you're just hitting go live on Facebook Live, and it's literally no different than if I were sitting in my living room and or sitting in the sanctuary at the church that I'm watching online. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Um, yeah, it does. And I think it always goes back to the idea of when you're thinking about this idea of authenticity versus perfectionism, but I don't really not necessarily think it's perfectionism per se. It's more of having a more professional look.
Do you
And
think, let me ask you this, do you think
yeah,
that you can have a look of authenticity and be professional at the same time and
uh,
not appear to be like a jerk or be, overcompensating for the way that you act because of that?
yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think when it comes to here's the thing, when it comes to like modeling authenticity, it's more of a heart issue with authenticity. Like if I have a church that let's say doesn't have the best building, ugly carpet, ugly walls, a lot of issues just with the building itself. But you come in and there are people who do a fantastic job at discipling children and youth, discipling adults, they have a worship service, and maybe, the worship may not be on a professional looking level like a Bethel or a Brooklyn Tabernacle or anything like that. But you could tell that these people, when they sing, they care about leading people in worship. They enjoy singing. You can tell they're authentic. It's not for show, but they really are when they're singing. They don't care. Yeah, I'm leading you as a singer, as a worship leader, but I'm also praising God at the same time. You almost can kind of see that as from an audience point of view. And I think what makes authenticity work so good is that people can connect to it.
Mhm.
Um, versus when you're trying to be professional, or we're trying, or maybe even like, or want to have a certain look. Like, I'm not saying that people can't be authentic and you have a good polished look. I think you can. At the same time, I feel like the authenticity within a polished space can also be hidden because, well, we have a good system of how to check in children and youth. Everything flows, how people get in and out of services flows very well. Like, you're not having too much congestion. It's not uncomfortable for people to move into service, out of service. um it's nice that I don't have to wait in line at Starbucks before church. I can go get a good quality coffee or latte or whatever right there at the coffee shop at the church. Like, there are certain things that can mask it very well. um but I think over time, and I think kind of like a lot of people who do go to bigger churches and they kind of eventually say, I no longer want to be a part of this church anymore. A lot of it really goes down to that focus of authenticity. For an example, I saw a video where a woman was saying how, she said that she's like an older millennial, um, but she took her kids to church, and her younger son was kind of being not bad, but just like a little snippy. And it wasn't like sat still through the whole service, great. Started to get a little restless. And an usher went and tapped her on the shoulder and told her, hey, you and your kid need to leave because it's interfering with the recording. And I'm thinking, for a church that says, hey, we want everybody to be here, no matter if you're a nuclear family, if you're a single mom, if you're black, white, whatever, and then you're telling someone you need to leave, you and your kid need to go out into the hallway because your kid's making too much noise. And she even said, like, I don't think he was making that noise. He just started fussing like a little bit, and all of a sudden there's someone right there, tap, tap, tap on the shoulder. Like, to me, it's like, okay, well, this is a church that I value. Its love is professional, but then, hey, my kid wants to sit in service, kind of fussing a little bit because he wants a cracker, and I'm trying to get out my bag, and then I'm being told you got to leave because you're making too much noise and the recording's picking it up. Like, which in my mind, it's like, well, they shouldn't pick that up if your sound person's good and they can record it right. But that's my opinion. Um, so yeah, I mean,
Well, let me ask you this.
yeah,
Thinking about the idea of authenticity and, you know, as a guy who led worship for 10 years, you know, the struggle and the conversation has always been we have to look modern, whether that's wearing a plaid shirt and jeans and, fancy shoes, or, you know, not wearing just a suit and tie on Sundays, but trying to change it up a little bit to look a little bit modern. Do you think that it's like, and this is something that I've struggled with for the past, couple of years as I've went and tried to visit other churches. I walk into a certain church and all the people on the platform, are wearing like, whatever the trendy thing is. And I feel like I'm not cool enough to go to that church. Have you ever felt like that, or do you feel like that's kind of an issue as well?
oh, I don't know.
Feel like I don't fit in because I'm not wearing, the hipster clothes and,
I
the
think so. I mean,
bomber jacket and whatever.
I think maybe there might be some of that. I mean, I think the other challenge too is it's hard to dictate people's personality and preference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, well, I mean, because like, as a pastor, I'm very good at talking to people and helping people and be able to share the gospel with people and even be able to listen to people's stories, especially if they've had some time of church challenges in the past. And, sometimes people could be like, yes, I like Pastor Scott. He's a great preacher. He listens to me. He understands me. And they could come and try out my church. And then they could show up and it just doesn't vibe with them. And it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe it is because it's more blended. Maybe it is because it reminds them too much of grandma and grandpa's church, which has a lot of negative feelings attached to it. So that's why they don't go. And then again, that's not nothing I can change. I can't say, oh, so it felt too like their grandma and grandpa's church, so let's repaint the walls, let's take off the wallpaper, let's rip up the carpet. Because even if I do all that just for that one family, then there's probably going to be another person who feels like that this doesn't feel like home. This doesn't, you know, and so I think that's kind of the hard part. So I think it really goes back to if people are really striving for authenticity, it has to be from the heart, building how the service is ordered, be darned, because at the end of the day, if I'm going to a church and I feel like there are people there that care about me, there are teachers there that care about my kids, or there is a pastor there who actually cares for me, prays for me, reaches out to me, or I can contact them and I don't have to, wait in a line to shake pastor's hand. Like I can go to pastor whenever, or I don't have to like send a note to his secretary and schedule a meeting 30 days out because he's unavailable or you just don't. Like I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like I said, authenticity is a heart issue, and it's very easy to connect with people through having a very polished professional look
Mhm.
than trying to be authentic because there's so many variables. But I mean, but I think that the one thing that people can say is, even if I go to a big church where it's big, it's polished, everything's nice, even though I can't really, even though I feel like I don't fit in, but it has a good kids program, like whatever the case may be, at least the one thing that people could always say about, the church that I work at or the churches I pastored before, and more specific to me is like, I feel like I can go to Pastor Scott and talk to him about anything. And he won't be he won't be judgy about it. He'll be open about it. He'll listen to me. He'll pray with me. And I think in that way they know, well, it may not necessarily, the church may not necessarily vibe, but at least I know Pastor Scott's authentic. And I think sometimes that alone, even if they are going to another church, even if they're going to a bigger church, in the end, when the polish starts to wear off and you really start to see some of the cracks in the foundation, and you're thinking, oh, this
What
isn't
you
as
thought it was.
cracked up, this isn't what I thought it was. At least you can go, oh, well, at least I know that Pastor Scott's church, I already know that the building is not what it's about. I know the building's not great. I know that there's a big mess, but at least I know that I'll be cared for.
Mhm.
At least I know that there's somebody who actually cares for me and will talk with me and I can talk to them and I don't have to, you know, may have to schedule an appointment depending on how many people want to talk to you, but at least I know it's not going to be months and months out because they're traveling, going to conferences, doing book signings, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
I there was a, you know, I don't know if you've heard of Crossroads Church, but it's out of Cincinnati. and they're one of the bigger churches in the country, and they have several campuses and the prison ministry and XYZ. Um, but their main campus is in downtown Cincinnati. But they also have a campus in Westchester, which is closer to our house. And for a long time, they offered a Saturday service. Um, I don't know, Saturday evening at 5 p.m. and it was like an hour, right? And so we used to go to that because when we were serving regular ministry, it was nice to just go to church and not be the pastor on staff. It was just nice to go and listen and see and get ideas and be inspired and XYZ. Um, and I knew going in because the way that they have it set up is they have the senior pastor, but they also have three teaching pastors right under him that are like in a rotation. So every month they all preach one time and they have that rotation every month. But like I know that I'm never going to get to see Brian Tone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm never going to be able to like you said, schedule a meeting, or even if I work to be able to schedule a meeting, it's going to take forever because he's filming this and he's filming stuff for the online church and he's like you said recording podcasts and signing books and speaking at conferences all over the country. And I'm never going to have that personal relationship with him. um, and every campus is a campus pastor, and I kind of felt the same way because that church, I think just that campus alone runs 3,500 to 4,000. And so it's like I'm never even going to get to have that same conversation with their campus pastor. And so like it's you know it's almost like the pros and the cons list, right? Like you have to like really decide as a person, as a leader, as a family, like, hey, where do I want to go to church? Does the kid stuff work for me? Does the worship work for me? Does the teaching work with me? Do I agree with theology? Um, and all of those things have to be authentic, right? Like you're talking about. And it's a hard list to have, make all the check boxes. But like you said, Scott, if you find a church, while it may not be big and the building may not be perfect, there may be some authenticity there that where people care about you, they love you, they care about your family, the child care is good, the children's ministry is good, the student ministry is good, and the pastor can send you a message and respond to you within a couple of minutes, or will text you back, or call you when he's not busy, or she. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for these days. But
Mm-hmm.
part of the problem too is that, like, on the flip side of that is that a lot of those churches are dying off because they don't have young families, and
Mm-hmm.
they have older generations that are dying off, and they're not having enough young, like they do have some young people but not enough to keep the church going. So it's like, well, do you rely on the things like marketing and branding and restructuring the way you do things a little bit, but keeping the core identity of who you are, and then also doing that kind of stuff? Um, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm here to tell you that there's no real perfect solution for that. People are like, well, how do you make a church grow? I'm like, well, a lot of it depends on your faith on God, your faith in God, and a lot of it depends on, you know, geographical things like location and building, and the people that are willing to it's almost like planning a church, for example. Like if you want to go out and start from scratch and you know grab a lot of attention that way, then it's doable. But if you're going to stay in the same building and say, hey, we're rebranding, it may or may not work. There's no guarantee.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
And
were you out?
yeah, and I think, and it's right. And it's funny because as much as, there's been times where I've heard younger families say, I really, like the church, but I really do miss kind of the order and almost the feel and the vibe, and even just kind of some of that older classic songs that you do see like within like some of the hymns or something, Yeah, we like the contemporary music, but we really wish there was like at least maybe one hymn played because, it's kind of that throwback in a way. And it's a shame too, because then eventually, let's say ideally all your grandma, grandpa, your more authentic churches decide to kind of close up shop because again, no one's going to them or bills get too high or you're in older buildings that eventually,
Okay.
you have to pay to keep upkeep and it's just too much now and you just can't do it anymore. And you finally get to that point where your bigger churches now kind of have a monopoly or a hold of like worship and that vibe and kind of the way worship goes. And when you start moving in those directions, if it's something that you are like, okay, I don't like the direction or the vision or the way this church is heading, where else do you fall in? Where else do you fall back to? Because it's almost like every single church kind of follows that same mainstream vision. They're
Yeah.
always chasing the next big fad or the next big thing. So it's almost like the authenticity or even kind of like that foundational vibe that, a lot of, millennials or even Gen Zers are like, oh, I wish we kind of get back to this, but it's like, well, it's not there anymore because, we kind of sold programs and performance over authenticity. And now that has won the day, and that's kind of what we as people say, this is what we want because that's what we're participating in, that's what we're giving our tithes to. And now it's like, well, I want to make sure, I mean, I love to have these kids programs, but I really need a community that I can share my joys and my burdens with. And it's like, well, that's not there, it's gone. And I don't know, and I think that's, I don't necessarily know if that will get to that point, because I feel like a lot of times with cultural shifts and just feelings, it's always like a pendulum. It's always swinging one way to another. So I mean, now if we're seeing the shift where people want more authenticity now and they want kind of more of that traditional vibe now, because that seems to be the one thing that they feel like is lacking in the modern church, then that's great. But eventually that pendulum's going to switch back, and then we want to have the professionalism, the programs, the perfection, kind of that perfectionist illusion in some ways when it comes to churches.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it as far as, and I think what I said earlier about, going to church and not feeling like I'm like cool enough to go. It's like, I think it goes along with what you said about chasing fads and, what's the next big thing? And it's like, well, this sounds pretty, simple, but it's like, what was it years ago? The song, I think One Thing Remains by Hillsong Worship. It's like, well, one thing remains in is Jesus, and like the simplicity of the gospel is Jesus, and his love and his grace and his mercy for us, and all the rest of the stuff is just stuff, right? And I think we get too hung up on, oh my gosh, uh, we don't have slides for the sermon, or if we do have slides, you know, somebody misspelled a word, or the colors. I'm colorblind, so I can't see. Yeah, it's like we get overly sensitive to, and I'm not trying to dismiss any of those things, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
at what point do you put your preferences aside and just focus on the reason that you're there?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. So, I mean, so kind of almost to wrap this topic up, like, I think for those of us who are listening, and maybe you might be someone who's kind of in that balance where you're kind of like, ooh, I've been going to this really popular or mega church within my community, and I really like it, and I really kind of like the people I hang with and everything else, but I feel like I'm kind of missing this authenticity in that. Like I think the big thing is if that's something that you as a person are missing, I would guess that there's probably other times where people are missing that as well. And I would say, like, if that's you and you know other people within your congregation who are kind of missing an authentic community in some ways, go ahead and start like a micro community. Start a micro community. Have your small groups. Have a way for you to really create a culture like that. I mean, now maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think if that's something that you really want, then you could try to see if you can create one within your own community. And if you can't, then I think that's when you really have to think about, okay, if, is having programming more important than authenticity? And I know I'm butchering that word. I'm having a hard time saying it because if your need for having an authentic church experience outweighs your need to have programs in professionalism, then maybe that's when you have to start saying, okay, I might need to go to a different church, a church that's going to feed that need. Because I mean, the reality is, you know, we say like churches have life cycles, but I think we too have life cycles, just what we like, our taste.
Well, just like we make fun of the older generation or give the older generation a hard time, we're getting older.
Yeah.
We're evolving.
And there's going to be times where we're going to be that older generation, like naysayer in the back of the church going, we need to make the font bigger instead of me moving up forward to the front. I still want to sit in the back, and my eyesight's bad. I can't see anything.
Or Scott's going to be back there going, I was here when the smoke was coming out of the room.
Yeah, jeez. Let's hope not.
Or
But
or when the kiddos found the gun in the bush.
the gun in the bush.
Or when somebody took a number 2 in the front yard of the church.
Yeah, let's hope 2025 is a better year so I don't have any more wild stories like that. But friends, thank you so much for listening to us. And hopefully, and if this is something that you're still kind of interested in and you want to keep the conversation going, feel free to chat in the comment section. Send us an email at our website, thescottstedman.com, and we would love to hear what your take on it, and we would love to read your responses on our next episode. So, friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll be back on with our episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.